how about we do a little transition into our hot take of the week with Mr. Jonathan, our friend, providing our hot take this week. So, this week's hot take, let's get into it. So, we got Sam Darnold will be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL in the next 3 years. Whoa. Wild. Let's see what his justification is. So, he is using Josh Allen as the person to compare Sam Darnold against because they were drafted in the same year. If you compare the stats of Allen and Darnold over their NFL careers, both of them share similar stat lines, obviously with the exception of 2020, in which Josh Allen was, arguably a top 5 quarterback, top 7 quarterback in the NFL. So you put a good team around Sam Darnold, and it's not impossible to see that Sam Darnold may make that leap, just like we saw Baker Mayfield or Josh Allen do. So you want to get into the stats, Chris?
Sure. So let's go into Josh Allen's stats first for a basis. So Josh Allen's stats in 2018, he started 11 games. He completed 52.8% of his passes, had 2,074 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Also that same year, he had 631 rushing yards on 89 carries and 8 touchdowns. Darnold that year had started 13 games. He completed 57.7% of his passes. He was 2,865 passing yards for the year, 17 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. Not great on the picks side. For 2019, Mr. Allen had started 16 games. He completed 58.8% of his passes, and he had over 3,089 yards passing, 20 touchdowns, and 9 picks. That's a pretty significant upgrade. But he did play 4 more games. Mr. Darnold had started 13 games that year. He completed 61.9% of his passes. He had 3,024 passing yards, and he had 19 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. He had 62 rushing yards on 33 carries and 2 touchdowns. Forgive me, I think I forgot to mention, but Josh Allen had 510 rushing yards on 109 carries and 9 touchdowns. All right. And for 2020, Josh Allen had 16 starts in 16 games and 69.2% completion, 4,544 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, along with 421 rushing yards on 102 carries and 8 touchdowns. That's incredible.
That's a pretty significant jump from 2017 or from 2018.
Meanwhile, Darnold started 12 games. He had 59.6% of his passes completed, 2,208 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, and 11 picks. And he had 217 rushing yards on 37 carries and 2 touchdowns. So we're going to exclude 2020 because that's what this hot take says. We're excluding the 2020 year where Allen took a leap. And as far as similarities, if we're just going to talk about these 2 years, I mean, I don't know about you, Chelsea. I can kind of see some similarities. Definitely Darnold's first year, he had a better passing percentage or completion percentage. And Darnold had 865 yards over Josh Allen in his first year. The picks, they were both pretty high. I mean, Darnold had 15, Allen had 12. It's not great, but Darnold had 17 passing touchdowns compared to Allen's 10 that year. But Allen also had 8 rushing touchdowns, whereas Darnold only had 1. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the two on their first year. For their second year, I mean, I think looking 2019, I mean, Allen definitely he got better through that year. I think it's interesting that I still remember that Texans playoff game where he was still making not great decisions. He was throwing like 90 yards to his fullback in a playoff game in overtime. And I'm just like, what
Bro.
is going on? I mean, look, no offense to fullbacks, but that's just normally not what you want. Darnold, I mean, yeah, he got better the next year, not by a significant amount. I guess though that Darnold had 13 picks compared to um, Allen's 9, which I think is interesting because Allen started more games. He started 3 more games than Darnold. And so if we look at these 2 years, I mean, I definitely see some similarities. I I do think though, I think coaching is a huge thing. I think that's something that people don't understand is that coaching is such a huge deal. And Darnold has been on the Jets where, I mean, we look at Adam Gase. I mean, he's probably going to be fired by the end of this year. And so
He
as
already
of
has been
now,
fired.
oh, he has been fired. My bad.
Yes.
It doesn't make any, it that stuff really impacts a player and can really shoot you in the foot, or it can, maybe you can survive and bring the team back to relevancy. I mean, Darnold was picked 4th overall, whereas Allen was picked, I believe, 10th. And so, I mean, the Bills were already in a little bit better of a situation than the Jets from when they drafted their QBs. So I I mean, honestly, in order for Darnold to turn it around, he's gonna have to get some solid coaching around him. He's gonna have to have a solid foundation built or already there that he can come into and fit right in. So at least that's what I think. Chelsea, what do you think?
Let's play around with hypotheticals, right? Because I was looking up Sam Darnold's last couple of games, right? And it's not like they were particularly great. Let's exclude the Patriots game. Let's talk about the games before that. So the 27th, he played the Browns. He only completed 50% of his passes, but he threw for 2 touchdowns, no picks. Against the Rams, he had a 71% completion percentage, only threw for about 200 yards, but had a touchdown, no picks. Against the Seahawks, his completion percentage was 53, about 54, had 132 yards, not great, no touchdowns, no picks. And then against the Raiders, he had a 60.9% completion and he had 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. So he had 6 touchdowns over his last 5 games and 3 picks, which still is not great. But I mean, if you look at the other games he played earlier in the season, against the Colts, he threw 3 interceptions. Against the Bills, he threw 2. Against the Dolphins, he threw 2. So, I mean, if you look at it, there has been slight improvement. Personally, I don't know if that's enough improvement to bank on him being your franchise quarterback, but let's say they do. Let's say that instead of the Jets taking either Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields at 2, let's say that they take Sewell, the O lineman, the generational O lineman coming out of Oregon. Let's say they take him. All right, cool. Or let's say they trade down and get 2 or 3 first round picks over the next few years. Cool. But let's say they take Sewell. I think that the Jets only have 1 first round pick. I know that they have quite a few, but I only think they have 1 first round pick. But for argument's sake, they take Sewell. How about we say that they take someone like Travis Etienne of Clemson to start as a running back, who is the highest touted running back prospect in this draft. Oh, maybe Najee Harris is a little higher. But let's say they take him. Let's say they go out and select a receiver like Rondale Moore out of Purdue, who's supposed to be really good. Or let's say they trade back and they take Jamar Chase, the really talented guy out of LSU. And let's just hypothetically say that they draft for every need that they want and hit on every pick. Do we think that would improve Sam Darnold's performance if he was on a better team. I think that's a valid argument. I think if you put Sam Darnold on a team like the Chiefs, that he would probably play better than being on the Jets. If you put him on a team like the Colts or like the Bills, he would probably play better. But I don't know if you can bank on that many hypotheticals to be able to keep him. And if all of those things end up working out and they end up with, getting some people in free agency, they hit on their early draft picks, let's say that all those things work out, I still don't know if that's enough to justify him making the leap like Allen did. And I still don't know if that's enough to justify that Sam Darnold would be a top 10 quarterback in the next 3 years. Because if he was going to be a top 10 quarterback in the next 3 years, not only would he have to improve his personal performance, if he stayed on the Jets would have to look like a brand new team. And I just don't know if you can turn over a whole roster in 3 years. But what if Sam Darnold gets traded? What if he gets traded to a team like Washington? With Riverboat Ron, a really good coach, developed Cam Newton, right? They have Terry McLaurin. They have a good rookie running back. They have an amazing defense. You put Sam Darnold on a team like that with a head coach like Ron Rivera, I think that gives him a better chance to succeed. But I don't think that he is going to be a top 10 quarterback in the next 3 years, especially if he stays on the Jets, just because the way that the Jets are now, it's going to take longer than 3 years to fix the franchise. Mm-hmm. But I do think that Jonathan presents an interesting point in comparing the two of them, though I think that Josh Allen is clearly on a better team than, Sam Darnold is. But, in 2018, the Bills, they didn't look like they did now. They weren't as good as they were now. They didn't have some of their receivers. They didn't have Diggs, right? They didn't have Stephon Diggs. They didn't have some of their players on defense. So it's not like we're talking about a 2018 Josh Allen on a 2020 Bills, right? The Bills were not as good nearly in 2018 as they are now. The quarterbacks that they were running before 2018 were nothing like Josh Allen, right? So, I think it hinges on either Sam Darnold getting put on a different team with good coaching and weapons, or it hinges on the Jets hitting on 5 of their draft picks and managing to convince 2 or 3 people to come in from free agency. But I just don't know if you can bet on that many probabilities. I think that he'd have a better chance of succeeding if he got traded to a team like Washington, because they have good coaches, good defense, a good receiver, a good running back, a line that is not the best, obviously, but can be improved. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's an interesting argument, and I think this is going to be such an interesting offseason this season. With the quarterbacks and the draft and everyone who's going to be moving around with COVID playing into it with the money and everything. It's going to be very interesting. But it would not surprise me if Sam Darnold ended up on a team like Washington.
Yeah. Actually, Washington could potentially be a good fit for him because I think he's, a young enough quarterback to where they could potentially put somewhat of a future in him, but also he's experienced enough to where it's not just some completely new guy coming in. He's had NFL experience before. And so I think Darnold to Washington, I think that could be a good move. As far as top 10, I don't see it as of right now. I could see Sam Darnold becoming somewhat of like an Alex Smith. He's going to get you consistent numbers, and that's not a diss at all. I think Alex Smith has proven himself to be a fine QB. He does exactly what he needs to do, and he can win games just like that. And so I could see Sam Darnold potentially being that kind of player. He'll get done what he needs to get done. He can even win you some games. He can maybe even a playoff game, but under the right
Patrick
system,
Mahomes.
He's not gonna drop 400 yards a game and go for MVP every year. He's not that guy from what we've seen so far, but he's somebody that I think could win you games. And so if the Jets want to let him go, I don't blame them. But I think another team with a good coaching staff already around, a good culture built, I think he could do some damage. So yeah, as far as top 10, I'm not sold on it. I'm sorry, Jonathan, but I'm not sold on it yet. If he gets there, then you know what, you're right, and you got this. You had this take right from, you got it. So props to you. But as of right now, I don't see it. But I could see him being above average, and that kind of Alex Smith type of player.
For sure. I agree with you. I don't really think that Sam Darnold's going to go out and magically transform into Aaron Rodgers. I he's still young. He's what, 24, 25. So I mean, he's not even relatively close to 30 yet. So I mean, he has a lot of time, especially under a good system to be able to turn his career around. And for his sake, I hope he does. Because I love seeing players succeed and I hope that he does succeed. But time is going to tell. I think Washington would be a really good fit for him. But I could also see the Jets being the Jets and not drafting a quarterback and keeping Sam Darnold and Sam Darnold still being bad. But I mean, let us know. What do you guys think? Hit us up on our socials. I mean, tell us what you think. Do you think that Sam Darnold has the potential to be a top 10 guy? Do you think if he gets put in the right system that he could be? Let us hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Send them Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
Facebook now. Ayo.
YouTube comments. Let us know.